The alarm didn't wake her. Maya Reeves was already awake at 4:17 in the morning, lying in the dark with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling of her two-bedroom apartment on Kedzie Avenue in Chicago. The radiator clanked against the baseboard the way it did every night, a dull, rhythmic knocking that she had long since stopped hearing consciously, but that still registered somewhere deep in the back of her mind, like a heartbeat she could not ignore. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on the street below, and the vibration traveled through the old brick walls and into the frame of her bed. She lay still and listened to it fade. 4:17. She had 13 minutes before the alarm would go off, and she used every one of them to remain where she was, because she knew that once she moved, the morning would begin. And the morning was a machine with its own momentum, relentless, mechanical, unforgiving. And she had learned a long time ago that the only way to survive it was to move through it without hesitation. At 4:30, she swung her legs out of bed and stood. The kitchen light buzzed on. She filled the coffee maker with water and grounds, the cheap brand, the one that tasted like burnt cardboard, but did its job. And while it dripped and hissed, she packed Ethan's lunch. Turkey and cheese on wheat bread, cut diagonally the way he liked it. An apple. A small container of crackers. She placed everything in his blue backpack and then wrote a note on a napkin with a black marker. "Have a great day. I love you more than all the stars." She had been writing notes like that since he started second grade, tucking them into his lunchbox every morning before a flight. Every evening, when she came home, she found the napkin folded neatly into a small square in his backpack pocket. He never said anything about the notes. He never needed to. Ethan was 9 years old, and he was the reason Maya did everything she did. She showered in 4 minutes, dressed in 5. Her uniform, the navy blazer, the pressed charcoal pants, the small gold wings pinned above her left breast, fit her like armor. She had worn it for 7 years now, and there were mornings when she put it on and felt competent, capable, grounded in purpose, and there were mornings when she put it on and felt like she was performing a role, playing a character in someone else's story. This was one of the performing mornings. The grief had not gone away. It had been 6 months since her mother died. A stroke, sudden, no warning, and Maya had expected the sharpness to dull by now. In some ways it had. She no longer cried at random moments. She no longer reached for her phone to call and then remembered. But the absence was still there, a hollow space in the architecture of her daily life. And some mornings she woke up, and the first thing she felt was not tiredness or dread, but a quiet, persistent ache. Like a bruise, she kept pressing on without meaning to. Her mother had been the one who helped with Ethan, not just babysitting, everything. The school pickups, the dentist appointments, the afternoons when Maya was 30,000 feet in the air and her son needed someone to listen to him talk about dinosaurs. Her mother had done all of it without complaint, because that was who she was. And now that she was gone, Maya had to find ways to fill every gap she left behind. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who lived in the apartment directly below, had stepped in. She was 67, retired, widowed, and she treated Ethan like a grandson. Maya paid her what she could, which was not enough, and Mrs. Patterson never mentioned it. At 5:40, Maya opened the door to Ethan's room. He was curled on his side, one arm dangling off the mattress, his mouth slightly open. She watched him breathe for 10 seconds. Then she pulled the blanket up over his shoulder and rested her hand briefly on his hair. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "Time to get up." He groaned, rolled over, buried his face in the pillow with the practiced resistance of a child who understood that sleep was precious and mornings were an imposition. "Mrs. Patterson's coming in 20 minutes. I left your lunch on the counter, the notes on the napkin." He opened one eye, squinted at her in the dim light from the hallway. "Can I have pancakes on Saturday?" Saturday, I promise. She kissed the top of his head. His hair smelled like the cheap strawberry shampoo she bought in bulk at the grocery store, and left the room before he could see her face. United Flight 247, Chicago O'Hare to Los Angeles International. Departure 7:15 a.m. Maya had worked this route dozens of times. It was a 5-hour flight on a Boeing 737-800, and she knew every beat of it: the boarding, the taxi, the takeoff sequence, the beverage service, the meal cart, the long, quiet middle stretch over the plain states, the descent into LAX, the landing. She knew which galley compartments stuck, which seats rattled during turbulence, and how to read a cabin full of strangers in under 30 seconds. She boarded the aircraft at 6:45 to begin her pre-flight checks. First class had 16 seats, economy had 160. She was working the front cabin today, first class, and the first 10 rows of economy. Her colleague Derek was handling the back. They exchanged a few words at the galley, the kind of conversation that happens between people who spend hundreds of hours together in small spaces, but rarely talk about anything real. The cabin filled slowly. Business travelers with rolling suitcases, a family with twin girls, maybe 4 years old, already fighting over the window seat, a group of college students settling into rows 14 through 18, loud and cheerful in the way that only young people traveling together can be. Maya stood at the forward galley, greeting each passenger with a nod or a brief smile, not forced, just practiced. Politeness had become reflex after 7 years. It was as automatic as breathing. Richard Calloway boarded at 7:02. She noticed him the way she noticed all first-class passengers. A quick, trained assessment, tall, broad through the shoulders. An expensive charcoal suit, the kind with subtle stitching that spoke of custom tailoring, the kind that cost more than 3 months of Maya's rent. Grey hair, swept back from a high forehead. A gold watch on his left wrist, not flashy but heavy, the kind that announced its value without trying. He moved through the aisle with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never in his life been asked to wait. He did not make eye contact with Maya as he passed. He did not say thank you. He simply walked through the cabin as though the aisle had been built for him alone and everyone else. The flight attendants, the other passengers boarding behind him. The plane itself existed to serve his passage. He settled into seat 2A and opened a leather portfolio without a word. Maya had seen men like Richard Calloway hundreds of times. They came through first class on every flight. Men who wore wealth like a second skin, who moved through the world with the absolute assumption that it owed them something. Some of them were gracious about it. Some were not. Richard Calloway was clearly in the second category. She didn't think much of it. First-class passengers who treated the crew with contempt were common enough that she had stopped being personally bothered by it years ago. Or so she told herself. The flight took off at 7:18 on time, which was unusual for O'Hare in the morning. The sky outside was grey and low, a ceiling of clouds pressing down over the city, and for the first few minutes the plane climbed through that grey before breaking into pale blue above, clean, cold, empty. Maya began beverage service at 7:35. She worked the cart with practiced efficiency, moving down the first-class aisle, offering drinks with a smile that was genuine enough to seem warm, but practiced enough to be consistent. When she reached seat 2A, Richard Calloway was reading something on his tablet. His jaw was set, his expression was flat and closed, like a door locked from the inside. "Good morning. Can I get you something to drink? We have coffee, tea, orange juice, and water." He didn't look up. "Bourbon, neat." "I'm sorry, sir. We don't carry bourbon on this flight. We have scotch and red or white wine available in first class. I can also—" "Then scotch." He said it the way someone might say, "Then get out of my way," still not looking at her. Of course. She poured the scotch, 2 fingers, neat, and set the glass on his tray table with a napkin. He didn't acknowledge it. She moved on to the next seat. The morning continued without incident for the next hour and a half. Maya completed her rounds, checked on passengers, restocked the galley. She was efficient, invisible in the way that good flight attendants learn to be after years of practice, present when needed, absent when not, a service function rather than a person. It was a skill she had cultivated deliberately, a kind of professional disappearance that allowed passengers to feel alone, even in a cabin full of 200 people. It was somewhere over Nebraska, or maybe Kansas. She rarely checked the map. When the situation in economy began, she heard it before she saw it. A woman's voice, rising in pitch, cracking at the edges. Not loud enough to cause a scene, but loud enough to carry through the quiet hum of the cabin. Loud enough to make several passengers turn their heads. Maya set down the coffee pot she was holding and walked toward the sound. Row 24. A young woman, mid-20s, dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing an oversized grey hoodie and jeans, was sitting in seat 24C, and she was crying, not quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep it bypasses all control. The kind that shakes the shoulders, that makes the breath come in sharp, hitching gasps, that cannot be stopped by willpower or embarrassment. In her arms, she clutched a small backpack covered in cartoon dinosaurs. Maya crouched in the aisle beside her. "Mom, are you all right? Can I help you with something?" The woman looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her face was pale beneath her skin, the way faces look when fear has drained the blood from them. "They took my son," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They said my seat was changed at the gate. Overbooking. They put me here, but they put him back there. Row 39. He's 2 years old. He's sitting in row 39 with a stranger." The words entered Maya's mind, and something dropped inside her chest. A cold, sharp sensation, like a stone falling into still water, the ripples spreading outward. They put a 2-year-old alone in row 39? The young woman, Carla, her name was Carla Mendez, though Maya didn't know that yet, nodded. Fresh tears slid down her cheeks. "I told them at the gate. I told them he can't be alone. They said it was the only available seat. They said someone would be with him." Maya stood up. Her voice was calm, the way it always was when things required action. "Stay here. I'm going to fix this." She walked to row 39 with quick, measured steps. There, in 39B, sat a toddler, a boy with dark, curly hair and wide brown eyes. His small body rigid, with the particular stillness of a child who doesn't understand where he is or why his mother isn't there. He was sitting on the lap of an older man in a polo shirt who looked deeply, visibly uncomfortable. His hands held slightly away from the child, as though afraid of doing something wrong. The man looked up at Maya with undisguised relief. "Thank God someone's come. He's been crying on and off for 10 minutes. I don't know what to do with him." Maya knelt down in the aisle. She kept her voice soft, the way she spoke to Ethan when he was frightened. "Hey, sweetheart. What's your name? Can you tell me your name?" The boy stared at her. His lower lip trembled. His eyes were enormous and wet. "It's okay," she said. "I'm going to take you back to your mommy right now. Can you do that for me? Can you come with me?" He nodded, a single jerky movement of his small head. She unbuckled the lap belt, lifted him carefully, and held him against her hip. He weighed almost nothing. He smelled like apple juice and the particular clean, sweet scent that very young children carry. She carried him back up the aisle to row 24, and when Carla saw him, when she saw her son in someone's arms, close and real and safe, she made a sound that was not quite a word, a sound of relief so deep it was almost pain. She reached for him with both hands, and Maya placed him gently into her arms. The mother held the child against her chest and closed her eyes. Maya watched for 3 seconds. Then she straightened up and turned her attention to the problem. Carla was in 24C. The boy needed to be with her, which meant someone needed to move. The seat beside Carla, 24B, was occupied by a man in a business suit who was asleep with noise-cancelling headphones on, his neck bent at an angle that would leave him sore for days. Maya checked her tablet. 2 empty seats remained in first class, 3A and 5B. If one first-class passenger agreed to swap down to economy, the cascade of seat changes could free up a spot next to Carla. She had done this before. It wasn't common, but it happened. Passengers swapping to accommodate families, couples wanting to sit together. Usually, someone was willing. Usually, it only took one person saying yes. Maya walked back to first class and began asking. Seat 1B, a woman in her 60s, silver hair, a cashmere scarf. Maya explained the situation quietly, politely. The woman's face showed genuine sympathy, but she shook her head. I have a bad back, she said. I really can't sit in economy. I'm so sorry. Seat 2B, a young man in a tech company hoodie, earbuds in, eyes on his laptop. Maya tapped his shoulder gently. He looked up, annoyed. She explained. He shook his head before she finished. I paid for this seat, he said, and went back to his screen. Seat 3B, a couple in their 40s. They listened to Maya's explanation with polite attention, then exchanged a look, the kind of silent conversation that married couples develop over years, conducted entirely through the eyes. The woman turned back to Maya. We're sorry, she said. We really can't. Maya moved down the aisle, steady, composed, her voice carrying the same calm and professional tone with each request. Each passenger declined, some apologized, some didn't bother to look at her while they said no. She reached seat 2A. Richard Calloway had finished his first scotch. A second glass sat on his tray table, half empty. He was watching her now, not with interest exactly, but with the particular kind of attention that some wealthy men pay to service workers when they find their struggles amusing. A spectator's attention, the attention of someone watching a performance. Maya explained the situation one more time. A young mother, a 2-year-old son, separated by a gate error. She asked calmly and professionally if he would be willing to move to an economy seat so that a seat could open up next to the child. Richard Calloway regarded her for a long moment. He picked up his glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down. Then he smiled. It was a thin smile, dry and dismissive, the kind of smile that contains no warmth whatsoever. It's not my problem, he said. His voice was relaxed, almost conversational, as though he were discussing the weather. You're just staff. Figure it out. That's what they pay you for, isn't it? The words settled into the cabin like something dropped into silence. A few passengers in nearby seats shifted uncomfortably. Someone in row 3 cleared their throat. The cabin's ambient noise, the hum of the engines, the quiet murmur of conversation, seemed to dim, as though the plane itself were holding its breath. Maya stood very still. She had heard versions of this before. The dismissal, the contempt, the casual cruelty of men who believed that money entitled them to treat other people as less than human. She had swallowed it before. She had smiled and walked away before. She had told herself it didn't matter, that it was the job, that she had bigger things to worry about. Ethan, the rent, the bills, the grief that sat in her chest like a stone she carried everywhere. But something about this moment, the young mother crying in row 24, the small boy with the dinosaur backpack, the weight of everything Maya carried every single day, the 6 months of grief and exhaustion and silence, something in her broke through the professional calm she had spent 7 years carefully constructing. She reached for the intercom handset at the forward galley. She pressed the button. The familiar chime sounded through the cabin, the sound passengers associated with safety announcements and boarding updates. And then Maya's voice filled the plane. Steady, clear. The way it always sounded when she spoke into the microphone. But beneath the steadiness, there was something else, something that every person on that plane could hear, even if they couldn't quite name it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Maya speaking. We have a young mother seated in row 24 who has been separated from her 2-year-old son due to a gate assignment error. Her child was placed in row 39, alone with a stranger. I have asked several passengers in first class if they would be willing to swap seats so this mother can sit with her child. Everyone has declined. I understand that you paid for your seats. I understand that this is not your problem, but I want you to hear what I'm about to say because I want you to understand something. I have a son. He is 9 years old. I raise him alone. Every single day, I leave him in someone else's care so that I can stand in this aisle and serve you and smile at you and make sure you are comfortable. That is what it means to be just staff. So I am asking one more time, not as an airline employee, but as a mother, if anyone in this cabin is willing to give up their seat so that woman can hold her child. If you can help, please press your call button. She released the button. The chime sounded again. The intercom clicked off. The cabin was silent. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then, in seat 4A, a man in a rumpled button-down shirt pressed his call button. The man in seat 4A was named Greg Hoffman. He was 47 years old, a middle school history teacher from Pasadena, returning home from an education conference in Chicago. He had a round face, thinning brown hair, and the slightly rumpled appearance of a man who spent most of his life in classrooms rather than boardrooms. He was not wealthy. He was not important in any way that the world measured importance. But when Maya walked to his seat, he was already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'll do it," he said simply. "Where do you need me to go?" Maya thanked him, genuinely thanked him, in a way that went beyond the professional politeness she used with passengers, and coordinated the swap. Greg moved to the open seat in row 24, next to Carla and her son. The man in 24B, the sleeping businessman, was gently woken and offered Greg's vacated first-class seat. He blinked awake, disoriented, and when Maya explained what had happened, he looked at the first-class boarding pass she was holding out, and then looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite guilt, but an awareness of something he had slept through. "Sure," he said quietly. "Sure, that's fine." Within 4 minutes, it was done. Carla Mendez was sitting in 24B with her son on her lap, and the boy had his face buried in his mother's neck. And Carla was crying again, but differently now, quietly, the crying of relief, not fear. Maya watched from the aisle for a moment. Then she turned and walked back to the front of the plane. But something had changed in the cabin's atmosphere. It was subtle, not something Maya could have identified precisely if someone had asked her to. But she felt it. A collective self-consciousness, as though the passengers had seen something about themselves reflected back at them and were not entirely comfortable with the image. Some of them looked at her as she passed. A few nodded. One woman in row 7 mouthed, "Thank you," as Maya went by. Maya did not look toward first class. She didn't need to. She could feel Richard Calloway's eyes on her from seat 2A, could sense his attention without seeing it. And she knew that his expression had changed. She didn't know what it had changed to. She didn't care. Not yet. The rest of the flight passed without incident. Maya completed the meal service, collected trash, checked on passengers during the long, quiet stretch over the desert states. She was efficient. She was professional. She did not think about what she had said on the intercom, because if she started thinking about it now, really thinking about it, she would have to reckon with what it meant, and she didn't have the space for that, not at 30,000 feet, not while she was working. She thought about it in small pieces, though, fragments that surfaced without warning and then sank again before she could examine them. She thought about the way the cabin had gone silent after she spoke. The way silence sounds different when it is shocked rather than peaceful. She thought about her mother, about a woman who had spent her entire life keeping her head down, who had worked in other people's houses, cleaning other people's messes, who had never once raised her voice in public, not once in 62 years. Her mother had believed deeply and without question that people like them survived by being invisible. Don't cause trouble, Maya. People like us can't afford trouble. Maya had heard that lesson so many times it had become part of her, woven into the way she walked, the way she spoke, the way she moved through the world. Yesterday, no, not yesterday, hours ago on this very plane, she had broken that lesson, publicly, deliberately, and she did not yet know what it would cost her. She thought about money. The pediatrician's bill, $340, still unpaid, sitting in a drawer at home like a small white accusation. The rent due in 11 days, the cost of groceries, of the electricity, of the bus pass Ethan needed for school. She had calculated it all, the way she did every month, adding up the numbers on a piece of paper at the kitchen table after Ethan went to bed, subtracting her take-home pay, seeing what was left. What was left was never enough. It was close. It was close enough to survive on if she picked up every available shift, if she said yes to every flight, if she spent as little as possible on anything that was not strictly necessary. She could not afford to lose this job. The thought sat in her chest like a cold weight as the plane began its descent into Los Angeles. The flight landed at LAX at 10:22 Pacific time. The descent was smooth, the landing gentle, and Maya stood at the cabin door and thanked each passenger as they deplaned, the way she always did. Most of them filed past without acknowledgement. A few said thank you. Greg Hoffman paused as he passed her. He stopped, actually stopped, which made the passengers behind him bunch up slightly, and he looked at her with an expression that was open and sincere and slightly embarrassed, the face of a man who was not accustomed to being the one who stepped up. "You did a good thing up there," he said. "Thank you for swapping," Maya said. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, well," he shrugged. "Someone had to." He walked off down the jet bridge, and Maya watched him go, and for a moment she felt something warm and unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, but something close to it. The feeling of being seen by someone who had nothing to gain from seeing her. Richard Calloway deplaned without looking at her. He walked past the door with his leather portfolio under his arm and his eyes fixed on some middle distance, and Maya noticed that his jaw was tight, tighter than it had been during boarding. He did not say thank you. He did not say anything at all. He disappeared into the terminal and Maya let him go. The crew hotel was a Marriott near the airport. Beige carpets, thin walls, the permanent smell of industrial cleaning solution and recycled air. Maya had stayed in dozens of hotels like it over 7 years of flying. They all blurred together into a single featureless place. Somewhere to sleep between flights, nothing more. She checked in at 11:15. Her room was on the 6th floor, facing the highway. She set her bag down, sat on the edge of the bed, and took off her shoes. The silence was immediate, the particular silence of a hotel room, which is not real silence but the sudden absence of the sounds you were just surrounded by. No engines, no cabin hum, no passengers asking for more water. She sat there for a few minutes, perfectly still, and felt the exhaustion settle into her bones. Then she picked up her phone and called Mrs. Patterson. "He's fine," Mrs. Patterson said, before Maya could even ask. "We had mac and cheese for lunch. He did his homework. Well, most of it. He said you'd understand about the reading assignment." "Did he eat the apple?" "He ate half of it. He gave the other half to that squirrel that comes to the fire escape." Maya smiled. It was an involuntary thing. It happened whenever Ethan did something that was both absurd and completely in character. "Can I talk to him?" "He's right here." There was a rustling sound, the muffled thump of a child running across a carpeted floor. And then Ethan's voice came through the phone, bright and slightly breathless. "Mom! Mrs. Patterson let me stay up until 9. Well, almost 9. I was reading." "Were you reading, or were you reading and then playing video games?" A pause. "Mostly reading." "How was school?" "Fine. Tommy said he saw a hawk on the way in." "A real hawk, Mom. In the city. Is that possible?" "Hawks live in cities. They nest on tall buildings." "No way. Really? Really? Next time you see one, look at the top of the tallest building nearby. That's where they nest." "That's so cool." He was quiet for a moment. "When are you coming home?" "Tomorrow night. Late." "Okay." Another pause. "Mom?" "Yeah, buddy?" "I love you more than all the stars." The words landed the way they always did, like a hand pressed gently against her chest, warm and steady. She closed her eyes. "I love you more than all the stars too," she said. "Go to sleep soon, okay?" "Okay, bye, Mom." "Bye, sweetheart." She hung up and sat in the silence of the hotel room for a long time after that, holding the phone in her hand, staring at the wall. Across the city, in a suite at the Beverly Wilshire, Richard Calloway sat in an armchair by the window and drank scotch from a crystal glass. The suite cost Wandels $200 a night. He had stayed in it before, many times, on many trips to Los Angeles, and he had never once appreciated it. The room was simply a place where he slept when business brought him here. The Egyptian cotton sheets, the Italian marble bathroom, the view of Rodeo Drive at dusk, none of it registered as luxury. It was simply the environment his life occupied. The way air was simply the environment his lungs occupied. You didn't notice it unless it was taken away. He had arrived at the hotel at 11:45, checked in, and gone straight to the suite. Now he sat with the glass in his hand and his phone on the side table and stared out at the city below, the afternoon light catching the glass towers downtown, the sprawl of it, the endless, indifferent sprawl, and he did not think about the flight, or rather, he tried not to, but it kept coming back. The woman's voice on the intercom. Not angry, not dramatic, just clear, just honest, in a way that people in his world almost never were. The way she had said that is what it means to be just staff, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact, spoken aloud so that everyone could hear it. A door opened to show him something he had never thought to look at. He took a long sip of the scotch and pushed the thought aside. His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant. "Meeting confirmed for 9 a.m. tomorrow, Westwood office, briefing materials attached." He didn't respond. He set the phone face down on the table. The suite was very quiet. The kind of quiet that expensive rooms are designed to produce. Soundproofed, climate-controlled, sealed off from the world. Richard had spent decades filling this kind of silence with work, with deals, with the constant forward motion of acquisition and ambition, but tonight the silence felt different. Tonight it felt less like peace and more like emptiness, the emptiness of a room that had never been lived in, only occupied. He finished the scotch and poured another. At 7:00 p.m. his phone rang. Not a text, a call. The name on the screen was Daniel. Richard stared at it for 3 full seconds before answering. "Daniel?" "Dad." His son's voice was flat, careful, the voice of someone who had rehearsed what he was about to say. "I wanted to let you know something before you heard it from someone else." "What is it?" "I'm moving to London for work. The transfer goes through next month." Richard said nothing. He held the glass in his hand and looked out the window at the darkening sky. "I'm not calling to... I don't want anything from you," Daniel continued. "I just thought you should know in case you're ever in London." A pause. I don't know why I'm calling, actually." "Daniel, I have to go. I have dinner." The line went dead. Richard lowered the phone slowly. He set it on the table next to the empty glass. Then he sat very still, in the expensive chair, in the expensive room, in the expensive silence, and felt something settle in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. Something that had no name he was willing to give it, something that sat there like a stone dropped into water and did not go away. Maya didn't sleep well that night. The hotel bed was more comfortable than her own, certainly, but her mind would not quiet. She lay in the dark and replayed what she had said on the intercom, word by word, and each time she replayed it, a different feeling rose in her. Sometimes it was something close to pride. She had spoken the truth. She had said what needed to be said, and a mother had been reunited with her child because of it. Other times it was fear. She had gone off script. She had made a personal statement on a commercial aircraft intercom, something that was, technically, a violation of airline protocol. She had revealed private information about her life to 200 strangers. She had told them she was a single mother. She had told them she was struggling. She had opened a door that could not be closed again. What would happen when she reported for her next shift? She had seen it before. Crew members disciplined for minor infractions, for saying the wrong thing, for existing too visibly in spaces where invisibility was expected. At 6:15 a.m., her phone buzzed with an email from the airline's crew relations department. The subject line read, "Cabin announcement, Flight 247-0130. She read it once. Then she set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, and the fear and the pride sat side by side in her chest, and neither one was louder than the other. The return flight, United Flight 248 Los Angeles to Chicago, departed at 2:45 p.m. Pacific Time. Maya had read the email from crew relations 3 times that morning and had decided not to respond to it yet. Not until she was home. Not until she had seen Ethan's face and felt the ground beneath her feet again. The email could wait. Everything could wait. She reported for her pre-flight check at 1:15 p.m. The routine was the same as always, checking equipment, reviewing the manifest, exchanging words with the other crew members that meant nothing beyond acknowledgement of each other's presence. She moved through it mechanically, the way she always did, letting her body do the work while her mind drifted. It was during boarding that she saw him. Richard Calloway walked onto the plane at 1:38, and this time there was no leather portfolio under his arm. He wore a different suit, dark blue, slightly less immaculate than yesterday's, and his face looked different. Not different in structure, but in expression. Something had shifted behind his eyes. The smooth, practiced mask of contempt that had been there yesterday was still present, but it was thinner now, like a coat of paint over wood that was beginning to show through. He was in first class again, seat 1A this time. Maya watched him settle into his seat and felt a complicated tangle of emotions that she did not have time to sort through. She acknowledged his presence with the same nod she gave every passenger and moved on. The flight filled. The doors closed. The plane taxied and took off into the bright California afternoon, climbing out over the Pacific before banking east toward the interior of the country. Maya began beverage service at 3:00 p.m. When she reached seat 1A, Richard Calloway was staring out the window. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from travel, but the deeper kind, from a night spent not sleeping, from thoughts that would not stop. "Can I get you something to drink, sir?" He turned from the window. For a moment, he looked at her as though he were seeing her for the first time, not as a uniform, not as a function, but as a person standing in front of him. The look lasted only a second or two before his expression settled back into something more guarded. "Water," he said. "Please." The word please was new. Maya poured the water and handed it to him. Their eyes met briefly, not with hostility, not with warmth, but with a mutual recognition of something unresolved between them. Then she moved on. The flight was quieter than yesterday's had been. Fewer children, fewer large groups. The cabin had the subdued atmosphere of an afternoon departure. Business people returning home, a few retirees, the particular tired silence that settles over a plane in the middle of a weekday. Maya worked the cabin efficiently. She was on autopilot. The routine was so deeply embedded in her body that she could perform it without conscious thought, freeing her mind to drift. And it drifted inevitably back to the email from crew relations. The email had been polite but firm. It acknowledged the situation with the young mother. It acknowledged that a gate error had occurred and that Maya had acted to resolve it. But it also noted that her use of the intercom to make personal statements was outside the scope of standard operating procedures. It requested that she attend a meeting with her supervisor upon her return to Chicago. It did not use the word disciplinary, but it didn't need to. Maya had known when she pressed that intercom button that there would be consequences. She had known it the way she knew that touching a hot stove would burn her, an immediate, instinctive understanding of cause and effect. And she had done it anyway, because in that moment the consequences had felt less important than the truth. She wondered sometimes if her mother would have understood that. It was at 4:30 p.m., somewhere over Arizona, that Maya noticed Richard Calloway had left his seat. She was in the galley, restocking water cups, when she saw him. He had walked to the rear of the first-class cabin and was standing near the partition that separated first class from economy, leaning against the bulkhead with his phone pressed to his ear. His back was to her. His shoulders were tight, not the tightness of anger, but the tightness of someone holding something in, clenching against a pressure that threatened to break through. Maya couldn't hear the conversation. She wasn't trying to, but she could see his body language, the white-knuckled grip on the phone, the way his head dropped slowly, as though a weight had been placed on it that he could not support. After a few minutes, he lowered the phone. He stood there for a moment, completely still, staring at the floor. Then he turned and walked back to his seat. And as he passed the galley, Maya caught a glimpse of his face. His eyes were wet. She said nothing. She didn't look at him directly. She simply noted it, the way a person notes something significant but private, and continued what she was doing. There were boundaries, even here, especially here. The moment came later, during the long, quiet stretch over the plains. Maya was passing through first class on her way to check on a passenger in row 3 who had pressed the call button when she noticed that Richard Calloway's tray table was down and his water glass was untouched. He was sitting with his eyes closed, but he wasn't asleep. His breathing was too irregular for sleep. His jaw was working slightly, the way it does when a person is clenching and unclenching their teeth without realizing it. She stopped. She didn't know exactly why she stopped. Something in her, not her professional instinct, but something older and less rational, told her to. "Sir?" she said quietly. "Are you all right?" He opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked disoriented, as though he had surfaced from somewhere very deep. Then he focused on her, and something in his expression, the mask, the armor, the carefully maintained wall of indifference, cracked, just slightly, just enough for her to see what was underneath. "I don't know," he said. His voice was rough, quieter than she had ever heard it. "I'm not sure I am." Maya nodded. She didn't sit down. That would have been too intimate, too presumptuous. But she didn't walk away either. She stood there in the aisle and waited. The way you wait when someone is on the edge of saying something and you know that if you push, they will stop. Richard looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "My son called yesterday. He's moving to London. He didn't invite me to visit. He didn't ask me to come. He just told me." He paused. "I haven't spoken to him in 3 years. He stopped returning my calls." Maya said nothing. "I spent my entire life building something," Richard continued. His voice was flat, the way voices get when emotion has been carried so long it has become ordinary, when the pain has been repeated so many times inside a person's own mind that it has lost its ability to surprise. "I built a company, I made money, I did everything I thought a man was supposed to do, and my son won't speak to me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Maya saw something in his eyes that she recognized. Not wealth, not power, not the confidence of a man who had conquered every room he had ever entered. She saw loneliness, the deep, structural kind, the kind that no amount of money could touch, because money couldn't make a person stay, couldn't make a person love you, couldn't undo the years of absence that had driven someone away. "Why did you make that announcement?" he asked. "Yesterday, on the plane." Maya considered the question. She could have deflected, given a professional answer, something about airline policy and passenger welfare. That would have been safe. That would have been the version of herself she had spent 7 years maintaining. But she was tired of that version. And something about the way he had asked, not with contempt, not with the dismissive curiosity of a man entertaining a servant, but with genuine bewilderment, the bewilderment of someone who had never encountered honesty in a context like this, made her answer truthfully. "Because it was true," she said, "every word of it, and because I was tired of pretending it wasn't." Richard nodded slowly. He looked down at his untouched water glass. "I said something cruel to you yesterday," he said. "It was not an apology. It was an acknowledgement, flat, factual, devoid of the performative remorse that men like him sometimes offered as social currency. But it was real. Maya could hear that it was real. The way you can hear the difference between someone telling the truth and someone performing it. "Yes," she said, "you did." They sat with that for a moment, or rather, he sat and she stood, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable but heavy, weighted with the particular gravity of two people who had seen each other clearly for the first time. "I have a son too," Maya said. "He's 9. His name is Ethan. He's the reason I do this job." She paused. "He's also the reason I said what I said on that intercom, because I want him to know that his mother didn't spend her whole life looking at the ground." Richard said nothing, but he nodded again, a small, slow movement, and something in his face shifted. Not a smile, not anything so simple as a smile, but a change. A door opening, just a crack, onto something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Maya excused herself and walked back to the galley. She did not look back. The rest of the flight passed in relative quiet. Maya completed her duties with the same efficiency she always brought to the job, the same calm, the same practiced composure. But something had shifted inside her, and she could feel it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. The conversation with Richard Calloway had not resolved anything. It had not changed the fact that she had an email waiting for her from crew relations, or that her rent was due in 10 days, or that her mother was gone and would never come back. Nothing had been fixed, but something had been said that needed to be said, and something had been heard that needed to be heard, and Maya had learned, over 9 years of raising a child alone, that sometimes that was enough. Sometimes the act of speaking the truth, not for effect, not for sympathy, but simply because it was true, was its own kind of forward motion. She thought about Ethan. She thought about Saturday morning and pancakes, and the way his face looked when he laughed, open and unguarded, the way children's faces are before the world teaches them to be careful. She thought about the note on the napkin, and the way he folded it into a square, and the way he had said, "I love you more than all the stars" on the phone last night, as though it were the most obvious and unremarkable thing in the world. She thought, "I want him to be proud of me." And then, quieter, "I want to be proud of myself." The plane landed at O'Hare at 8:47 p.m. Central Time. The sky was dark and clear, a rare clear night in Chicago in January. The stars visible above the light pollution for once, scattered and cold and distant. Maya stood at the cabin door and thanked each passenger as they deplaned, the same way she had done 1,000 times before. Richard Calloway paused as he passed her. He stopped, which made the passengers behind him bunch up slightly in the aisle, and he looked at her. He didn't say thank you, he didn't apologize again, he simply looked at her. And in his expression, Maya saw something she could not quite interpret, not quite regret, not quite respect, but something in between. Something that acknowledged her as a person, fully and without qualification, for the first time. Then he nodded, once, short, definitive, and walked off down the jet bridge and disappeared into the terminal. Maya watched him go. Then she turned back to the empty cabin and began her post-flight checks. She took the crew shuttle to the airport parking garage, where her car, a 2016 Honda Civic with a cracked windshield she kept meaning to fix, sat waiting in the cold. The engine took a moment to turn over, the way it always did in January. She let it warm up, turned on the heat, and sat in the concrete structure, listening to the engine idle and the heater blow cold air that gradually became warm. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson. He's asleep. Ate dinner. Brushed his teeth without being asked. You have a good kid. Maya smiled. She typed back, "Thank you. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I'll try not to wake him." The drive from O'Hare to Kedzie Avenue took 22 minutes at that hour. Light traffic, the expressway mostly empty. Maya drove in silence. No radio, no podcast. Just the sound of the engine and the road, and the occasional flash of streetlights passing overhead. She thought about the meeting on Thursday, what she would say, how she would say it. She thought about Ethan, asleep upstairs. And the pancakes she had promised for Saturday. She thought about Richard Calloway, somewhere in the city, or already on his way to wherever he lived, sitting with whatever it was he was sitting with. She thought about her mother. Her mother had died on a Tuesday in July. A stroke, sudden, no warning. Maya had been in the air when it happened, somewhere between Chicago and Denver at 38, Sudra-Zeberan feet, completely unreachable. By the time she landed and turned on her phone, it was over. Her mother had been taken to the hospital by ambulance and had died there, alone, while Maya was serving coffee and asking passengers if they wanted peanuts or pretzels. That was the thing no one told you about this job, the thing they left out of the training manual. You were always somewhere else when the things that mattered most were happening. You were always 30,000 feet away from your life, suspended between places, belonging to neither. Maya had carried that guilt for 6 months. She had carried it quietly, the way her mother would have wanted, without complaint, without making waves. She had told no one about it, not really. Not the full weight of it, not the way it sat in her chest at 4 a.m. when she couldn't sleep, not the way it colored every moment she spent away from Ethan, not the way it made her feel sometimes like she was living her life in pieces, scattered across time zones, and that no single piece was ever quite enough. Yesterday, no, 2 days ago now, on the intercom, she had spoken some of it aloud. Not all of it, but enough. Enough for it to be real, out in the air, spoken to 200 strangers instead of kept locked inside where it had been growing quietly in the dark. She pulled into the parking spot behind her building at 9:19 p.m. She sat in the car for a minute after turning off the engine in the sudden silence and breathed. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the hallway outside Maya's apartment door, wrapped in a cardigan, a cup of tea in her hand. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with white hair and sharp, kind eyes. She had been Maya's neighbor for 11 years. And in that time, she had become something close to family, not a replacement for Maya's mother. Nothing could be that, but a steady presence, a reliable one in a life that had very few. "He went down easy tonight," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Asked about the Hawks again. I think he looked something up on the internet while I wasn't watching." Maya smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. P, for everything." "Go see your boy," Mrs. Patterson said, and squeezed Maya's arm once before disappearing back into her own apartment. Maya let herself in. The apartment was quiet, the particular quiet of a sleeping household, warm and close and still. She set her bag down by the door, took off her shoes, and walked down the short hallway to Ethan's room. He was asleep on his back this time, one arm thrown above his head, his mouth slightly open. The nightlight on his bedside table cast a pale blue glow over his face. On the table beside him was a library book, Hawks and Eagles of North America, and a half-eaten granola bar wrapped in a napkin. Maya stood in the doorway and watched him sleep. She did this every night she was home, stood there for 30 seconds or a minute, just watching, just making sure he was real and present and safe. It was a ritual she had developed after her mother died, though she couldn't have said exactly why. It had something to do with gratitude, something to do with the awareness that nothing in life was guaranteed, and that the things you loved most could be taken from you without warning, without negotiation. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of his bed. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. She brushed the hair from his forehead, gently, the way her mother used to do for her, and leaned down and pressed a kiss to his temple. "I'm home, buddy," she whispered. "I'm right here." In the morning, Maya sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened her laptop. The email from Crew Relations was still in her inbox. She read it again, carefully, word by word. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday, 2 days away. She would sit across from her supervisor and explain what she had done and why. She would be honest, not defensive, not apologetic, but honest. She would tell them about the gate error. She would tell them about Carla and her son. She would tell them that she had made a personal statement on the intercom because a child needed his mother, and because no one else was willing to help, and because she believed that was the right thing to do. She didn't know what would happen. She might receive a formal reprimand. She might be reassigned. In the worst case, she might face consequences she couldn't yet predict. The airline had rules. She had broken one of them, knowingly and deliberately, and there would be a reckoning. But sitting there in her kitchen, in the early morning light, with the sound of Ethan stirring in his room down the hall, Maya found that she was not afraid. She had spent 7 years being invisible, 7 years swallowing what she felt, keeping her head down, performing a version of herself that was competent and pleasant and utterly without edges. She had done it to survive. She had done it to keep her job. She had done it because her mother taught her that people like them couldn't afford to be seen. But she had been seen now. On that plane, in front of 200 strangers, she had been seen. And the world had not ended. No one had cast her out. A man had pressed his call button and given up his seat, and a mother had been reunited with her child. And something true had been spoken aloud, and it had mattered. That was enough. For now, it was enough. Richard Calloway landed in New York at 11:52 p.m. Eastern Time. He took a car back to his apartment on the Upper East Side, a penthouse, the kind of apartment that magazines photographed and that interior designers built careers around. It was large and quiet and beautifully furnished, and in the way that only truly expensive spaces can be, profoundly empty. He didn't turn on most of the lights. He poured a glass of water, not scotch, water, and carried it to the living room, where floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city. Manhattan at midnight, the lights, the towers, the endless vertical ambition of the skyline. He had looked at this view thousands of times. Tonight it looked different, not more beautiful, not more impressive, just more honest in its indifference. He sat down and took out his phone. Daniel's number was on the screen, the last call from yesterday afternoon. He stared at it for a long time. Then he opened his contacts and typed a message, not to Daniel, to his assistant. The message read, "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the week. I need some time." He set the phone down and drank his water and sat in the quiet of his penthouse and thought about a woman in a navy blazer who had stood in the aisle of a commercial aircraft and told the truth. He thought about what she had said. "I want him to know that his mother didn't spend her whole life looking at the ground." He thought about Daniel, about the years he had spent in conference rooms and boardrooms and airports while his son grew up in rooms Richard barely remembered entering, about the phone calls he had missed and the birthdays he had attended late or not at all, and the slow, invisible erosion of a relationship that had once been the most important thing in his life. Eroded not by any single act, but by 1,000 small absences, each one unremarkable on its own, each one adding to a weight that eventually became too heavy to carry. He did not call Daniel. He knew better than to do that now, knew that a phone call tonight would feel like a reaction rather than a choice, and that Daniel, if he answered at all, would hear the desperation in it and would pull further away. But he picked up the phone again, and he opened his email, and he began to type a letter, a real letter, not a business communication, not a brief, efficient exchange of information, but a letter to his son. About everything. He didn't finish it that night. It was too long, and there was too much to say, and the words kept coming out wrong, too polished, too controlled, too much like the man he had spent decades becoming. He deleted and rewrote and deleted again, trying to find the version that was honest, the version that sounded like a father, not a CEO. He would try again tomorrow, and the day after that. He didn't know if Daniel would ever read it. He didn't know if it would matter, but he was writing it. And for Richard Calloway, that was new. Saturday morning. Maya stood at the kitchen stove, a spatula in one hand, a bowl of batter on the counter beside her. The apartment smelled like butter and maple syrup, warm, sweet, the smell of something that belonged. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his library book open in front of him, reading about hawks, his chin resting on his hand. "Mom," he said, not looking up from the page. "Did you know that red-tailed hawks can spot a mouse from 1,000 feet in the air?" "I did not know that," Maya said. She poured another circle of batter into the pan and watched it sizzle. "That's like if you were standing on top of the Willis Tower and looking down at the street, you could see a mouse, a single mouse, from way up there. Hawks have incredible eyes. Better than ours, much better than ours." He considered this for a moment, turning the page. "I want to be an ornithologist," he said. "A what?" "Someone who studies birds, that's what it's called. An ornithologist." Maya smiled. She flipped the pancake, golden brown, perfectly round, and slid it onto the plate with the others. "Then that's what you'll be." Ethan looked up from his book and watched her cook for a moment. Then he said, "Mom?" "I found the note in my backpack, the one you wrote before you left." "Yeah?" "It said, 'I love you more than all the stars.'" He paused. "I kept it. I put it in my drawer with the other ones." Maya turned from the stove. She looked at her son, at his face, open and earnest and completely without pretense, and she felt something settle in her chest, not the cold weight of grief or the tight pressure of worry, something else, something warm and steady and real. "I'm glad you kept it, buddy," she said. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his book. Maya turned back to the stove and finished making the pancakes. Outside, Through the kitchen window, the January morning light fell pale and thin across the rooftops of the city. Somewhere far away, a hawk was circling above the skyline, riding the thermals, seeing everything from 1,000 feet up. And in a small apartment on Kedzie Avenue in Chicago, a woman made breakfast for her son, and the morning was quiet, and the light was soft. And for the first time in a very long time, Maya Reeves did not feel like she was looking at the ground.